Husbands and wives that got divorced after 20 years of marriage. What made you decide to change your mind after all that time? My parents were married for 22 years before they decided to call it quits. By the time the divorce was finalized, it had been 24 years of marriage. As their kid, it was painfully clear they weren't happy together. Our house was rarely quiet, thanks to my dad's temper and my mom's ability to match it. Growing up, I always felt like I was walking on eggshells. Any little thing could set off an argument. My dad was a strict guy, old school in his thinking. He believed a man's place was at work, earning a living, while a woman's place was at home, caring for the house and the kids. My mom, however, wasn't the type to just roll over and accept. She was strong-willed, independent in her own way, and not afraid to voice her opinions. The final straw that broke the camel's back wasn't one single event, but a series of incidents that built up over time. I remember one evening vividly, a chilly fall night when the air had that sharp, crisp smell. Dad had come home from work, looking more agitated than usual. He stomped into the house, slamming the door behind him, and immediately started complaining about dinner not being ready. Mom was in the kitchen, still in her work clothes, trying to juggle making dinner and helping me with my homework. "You've been home for hours. What have you been doing?" Dad's voice was a low growl. Mom didn't even look up. "I just got home, Dave. I've been at work too, remember?" That was enough to set him off. Plates clattered, voices rose, and the familiar chaos ensued. I retreated to my room, the shouting muffled by my closed door, but still loud enough to hear every angry word. Days turned into weeks, and the tension in the house grew thicker. Dad's rigid expectations clashed more and more with Mom's need for independence. He started coming home later, often reeking of alcohol, his temper even short. Mom, on the other hand, began to spend more time out of the house, finding solace in friends and activities outside the home. One night, things escalated to a point of no return. Dad had been drinking, and he was in one of his foul moods. I was in the living room, trying to focus on a book when the front door slammed open. He stumbled in, eyes bloodshot, and started yelling for Mom. She appeared at the top of the stairs, looking tired and fed up. "I'm done, Dave. I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice steady but filled with exhaustion. "What the hell are you talking about?" he shouted, his face red with anger. "I'm leaving. I'm taking the kids and leaving," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "You're not taking my kids anywhere," he bellowed, stepping towards the stairs. That night was a blur of yelling, crying, and confusion. Mom packed a bag for herself and us kids, and we left, staying at a friend's place for the night. The next morning, she filed for separation. The divorce process was long and messy. There were endless arguments over custody, finances, and property. Dad fought tooth and nail, refusing to accept that his idea of family was shattered. Mom, meanwhile, was determined to build a new life for us, one free of constant conflict and fear. High school was a whirlwind of emotions and challenges, but nothing prepared me for the chaos that ensued when my dad got injured at work. He had always worked a physically demanding job, and one wrong move led to a serious back injury that required surgery. The doctors said he'd be out for at least 6 months. This was a massive blow to our family, already struggling to keep up with the vehicle and house payments. Mom, ever the resilient one, decided to find part-time work. She was determined to make ends meet while still being there for us kids. She managed to find a job that fit perfectly with our school schedule. She would see us off in the morning, work during the day, and be home when we got off the bus. But instead of appreciating her efforts, Dad's paranoia kicked into overdrive. He immediately suspected the worst, that Mom was cheating on him. It was like a switch flipped in his mind, and he couldn't see reason. He installed a tracker and a tape recorder in her car without her knowing. The first time he showed up at her workplace, he caused such a scene that her co-workers were left speechless. He barged in, accusing her of having an affair, demanding to know who she was seeing. It was embarrassing and terrifying. She came home that night shaken, but she tried to shield us from the worst of it. Dad wasn't content with just one confrontation. He kept showing up, questioning her colleagues, trying to catch her in a lie that didn't exist. His jealousy was all-consuming, and when he wasn't harassing her at work, he was at home, drinking heavily. The alcohol only fueled his anger and paranoia. Our home became a battleground. The arguments that had once been sporadic now seemed constant. I remember coming home from school, hearing their voices raised even before I opened the front door. It was exhausting, and it took a toll on all of us. My siblings and I tried to keep our heads down, but it was impossible to escape the tension. One evening, things reached a boiling point. Mom had come home after a particularly grueling day at work, only to find Dad waiting for her, a drink in hand and a dark look in his eyes. He accused her of things I won't even repeat, his words slurring together in a hateful mess. Mom, who had always tried to remain calm, finally snapped. "Enough, Dave. I can't take this anymore. I'm working to keep this family afloat, and all you do is drink and accuse me of things I haven't done. This isn't an equal partnership, and it never has been." Dad looked taken aback, almost as if he couldn't believe she was standing up to him. But instead of backing down, he doubled down on his accusations. The fight escalated, and for the first time, I saw real fear in my mom's eyes. That night, after the yelling had subsided and Dad had passed out on the couch, Mom sat us kids down. "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm going to ask for a divorce." The next few months were a blur of legal proceedings and custody battles. Dad acted like the victim, hurt and betrayed by a situation he had largely created. He couldn't understand why Mom wanted out, even though it was painfully obvious to everyone else. He refused to take responsibility for his actions, blaming Mom for everything that went wrong. In the aftermath of the divorce, it didn't take long for Dad to rebound. I remember feeling a strange mix of relief and resentment when I heard he had found someone new. He had always been charismatic when he wanted to be, and apparently all he needed was to tell some woman on Plenty of Fish his sob story. It wasn't long before he moved right into her house, leaving behind the wreckage of our family to start anew. I didn't know much about his new girlfriend at first, just that she had a couple of kids around my age. Dad didn't talk about her much, and frankly, we didn't ask. We were still picking up the pieces, trying to adjust to our new normal without the constant tension and yelling. But word got around. Small towns have a way of making sure everyone knows everyone else's business. It wasn't long before we heard that Dad was treating his new girlfriend and her kids just as horribly as he had treated us. The temper, the drinking, the accusations. It was like he couldn't escape his own cycle of destruction. This woman, though, wasn't as willing to put up with it. After a couple of years of his behavior, she kicked him out. I can only imagine the scene that must have been, but I wasn't there to witness it. Surprisingly, Dad didn't stay down for long. He spent a couple of weeks in a cheap hotel, and before we knew it, he had found another woman to take him in. It was almost surreal how quickly he bounced back, moving from one household to the next like some nomad of dysfunction. Each time, he'd spin his tale of woe, painting himself as the wronged party. And each time, he'd find someone willing to give him a chance. Meanwhile, our lives were slowly stabilizing. Mom was doing her best to create a stable and loving environment for us. She worked tirelessly, balancing her job and parenting with a grace that still amazes me. We moved into a modest but cozy apartment, and for the first time in years, there was a sense of peace. The absence of constant conflict was like a breath of fresh air. High school became my escape. I threw myself into my studies and extracurricular activities, anything to keep my mind off the chaos of the past. I made friends, joined clubs, and found solace in the routine of school life. My siblings did the same in their own ways, each of us finding our paths to healing. Dad would pop in and out of our lives sporadically. There were awkward visits, stilted conversations, and strained attempts at normalcy. He'd try to paint a rosy picture of his new life, but the cracks were always visible. It was clear he was struggling, even if he wouldn't admit it. One day, during one of those visits, he sat me down. "I know I've made mistakes," he said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "I just want to make things right." I wanted to believe him, but years of broken promises and hurt couldn't be erased so easily. "It's not that simple, Dad," I replied. "You have to show us that you've changed, not just say it." He looked down, the weight of his actions finally seeming to sink in. "I know," he said quietly. "I know." Life went on, and gradually we learned to coexist with the fractured pieces of our family history. Mom remarried eventually, finding a man who treated her with the kindness and respect she deserved. It was strange at first, seeing her with someone new, but it was also heart. She smiled more, laughed more, and seemed genuinely happy for the first time in a long time. Dad continued his pattern, drifting from one relationship to the next, never quite finding the stability he claimed to seek. It was sad in a way, watching him repeat the same mistakes, unable or unwilling to break free.